Listeners, hello. We have a question for you. Are you interested in taking on a writing challenge in the new year? Something that will be both fun and supportive in getting a lot of words on the page? If so, we have something to tell you about. Grant, do you want to do the honors?
Yeah, I'm going to assume that everyone said yes to those questions just to start. And I am excited for our very first inaugural JanYourStory event where we'll be offering a challenge to Memoir Nation listeners, community members, and denizens, your friends, your enemies, whoever wants to join us in January to write 500 words a day. So I was executive director of National Novel Writing Month for 12 years. And the basic premise of that is that all you need is a goal and a deadline to really get the writing that you say you want to do, get it done and written now. We say a goal and a deadline is a creative midwife. And a good dose of community helps. And we also, we truly want to make writing fun. And that's really the spirit behind the event.
That's right. And it is totally free. You do not have to be a paying member of Memoir Nation to do this challenge, to join us for this challenge. You don't even have to be a listener of this podcast. So please go tell your writerly friends. Even more, you do not have to be a memoirist. JanYourStory is about writing, celebrating writing, and getting writing done in January. And if you complete the challenge, you will have written 15,000 words, which is a really motivating way to start the new year.
Yeah, so to get yourself poised to join us, all you have to do is go to memoirnation.com, go to the community button at the top menu, sign up for an account, and voila. Inside the community at the free level, there's a place to introduce yourself, to chat with other writers, and to see details about JanYourStory. And we'll be updating a lot of info in the next 2 months. So your action, rather your challenge today, right now, is to go and sign into our community. I promise you'll not regret it. In fact, I hope you'll leave with a memoir.
Yeah, really, it is going to be very supportive, very low pressure, and JanYourStory at a minimum will help you write more words than you will otherwise write in January. So open your browser on your computer or your phone, go to Memoir Nation, click community, and you're on your way. Hello, constituents, belongers, denizens, and our Memoir Nation community at large. Here we are 3 weeks into our JanYourStory prep, and today we are talking about community. I am Brooke Warner here with my co-host Grant Faulkner. And of course, Grant, I thought, it would be fun as we're talking about community to talk about our own origin stories a bit, because most of our listeners know that you're the former executive director of NaNoWriMo. And I think most of our listeners know that I'm the publisher of SheWrites Press. And I think it's known by some that behind both of these organizations lies a community and a community story. But I'm not sure I've ever asked you about how you got the job at NaNoWriMo. So what's that story?
Well, Chris Beatty always says that he founded NaNoWriMo by accident, and that's kind of true. And I think I became executive director kind of by accident as well. Although I think I can really answer that question through the lens of community, because this is one thing I'd actually like to tell my younger self, is that most things happen in life because of kind of who you know. And it's sort of like a 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon thing with me and Chris and NaNoWriMo. My best friend from college, Jake, was a good friend of Chris Beatty. So I knew Chris, but mainly as an acquaintance and just knew him a little bit. But at that time, I'd been working at the nonprofit, the National Writing Project. And one day at work, I decided I just wanted to learn more about nonprofits at a higher level. So I emailed Chris, because he was one of the few people I knew in the field, and asked him if he knew of any arts orgs that needed board members. And he invited me out to lunch, and one thing led to another. And he invited me to become a NaNoWriMo board member, which was totally a surprise to me. I wasn't really fishing for that. And then when I joined the board, Chris told me he was stepping down and that I should apply for his job. And again, I had no intention or desire to become an executive director of anything. But Chris is such a persuasive guy that he persuaded me to apply, and then I got the job. He somehow just saw something in me. And for that, I'm just forever appreciative, because I've grown as a person in just so many ways because of my time at NaNoWriMo. So I wouldn't have gone there without Chris.
Well, and I wonder if you could speak a bit about how NaNoWriMo changed you over these 12 years, or those 12 years. Were you particularly community minded before you started the job, or did the job make you community minded?
That's a good question. I think I was community minded without knowing it. I've always been surrounded by friends, and I'm the type of person who stays connected to people and very, very loyal. And I just can never imagine losing a friend, which is why I'm just always so devastated when it actually happens. And nothing makes me happier than connecting people, like I'm sort of a natural networker that way. Ironically, as a writer, though, I was extremely solitary. And so I really learned about the value of both professional and personal community in my time with both the nonprofits I worked for, the National Writing Project and National Novel Writing Month, NaNoWriMo. And a lot of people don't know this, but NaNoWriMo basically invented the write-in. We had at our peak 900 volunteers around the world organizing these in-person writing gatherings, and also had nearly 1,200 bookstores and libraries doing the same. So NaNoWriMo changed me by making me more community-oriented, but also because we were fundamentally a gate-crashing organization, so it helped me get over some of the snobbery I held about writing. I love seeing people write just for the sake of writing, and people who came out once a year just to write a novel with friends. Their motive wasn't publishing glory. They just wanted to create and to write and to tell stories with others. So I learned about the many different forms of community, and then a lot of lessons about building a community on both the small level and the big level, which continues to fascinate me.
Yeah, I love that, Grant. And I'm curious if you could share one of the most inspiring moments at NaNoWriMo over those 12 years, whether it was a small personal moment for a particular writer or, maybe it was a more global moment, something that stayed with you.
Yeah, I want to tell just two quick ones. One is from our Young Writers program where, again, at its peak, about 80,000 kids and teens wrote novels each year. And some of those kids, or even many of those kids, did not really want to write novels. And one parent wrote me to tell me how her fourth grade son, who had several, learning disabilities, he was just kicking and screaming and refusing to do it. And he wouldn't even go to school. But then he started to get into it, and he started to love his story, and he had fun writing, which is something too few kids do. Like I think that everyone should be taught through pedagogy of joy, especially writing, because it can be so hard for so many. But after November ended, he carried his spiral notebook around with him everywhere for months afterward to keep writing. And I just am touched by stories like that. And we had so many stories like that come in. And then for a while there, for several years, we worked with the Penn Prison Writing Program, and which was amazing in a totally different way. But this incarcerated writer, Derek Trumbo, he wrote me afterwards and said, I'm going to read, this is his quote: 30 days brought us together, broke us, exposed us, and laid our innermost flaws bare. But our shared hopes, dreams, and ambitions of being acknowledged in even the slightest of ways proved a beacon in the darkness of our incarceration. And, it just really brought it home about how stories connect people, because they formed a writing community within the prison. And then the stories that they wrote connected them to the larger world of NaNoWriMo, and it just showed me how much writing changes us in very powerful ways. So, Brooke, I'm going to kick it back to you with some of these questions. So tell us how SheWrites Press came to be.
Yeah, I guess I want to preface this a little bit by saying that some of this story is my TEDx talk because it centers why I left Seal Press and started SheWrites Press. But there's more to that story about SheWrites, because before SheWrites Press, there was SheWrites.com back in the late 2000s. And I was working at Seal Press, and it was such an exciting time to be there. I, at that time, felt that I had the absolute best job in the world. I was interacting with so many interesting people. The feminist blogosphere was blowing up in really exciting ways that intersected with Seal. It was the heyday of feministing, Jezebel, Feminist, Pandagon, a lot of people who were around during that time and reading feminist media will recognize those blogs. And then a lot of the women who founded those sites or who were writing for those sites were Seal Press authors. And so when today's guests, Kamy Wicoff and Deborah Siegel, launched SheWrites.com in 2009, I was very much aware of its presence. Like, it went from nothing to something almost overnight. That was like, it was one of these things that was very much a phenomenon. Like, it was not there and then it was there. Mm-hmm. And Kamy and Deb are going to talk about this. I mean, there was such a hunger back then, women connecting online, looking for spaces, wanting spaces that were female specific. And then I knew Kamy and Deborah in different capacities. Kamy because I had asked her to blurb one of our books, and Deborah because she'd been a contributor to a Seal Press anthology. And then interestingly, I went to a SheWrites.com get together in Denver And thinking back, I mean, it must have been the same year it launched because it was like early days. And then I was keeping tabs on what they were up to because it was so exciting. The community part was so exciting. It was so empowering. And it was 2012. So, it was 3 years later. And I was obviously like involved in the community in different ways. I was blogging for them. I did a webinar for them. And so when the idea came to me that I wanted to start a press, I contacted Kamy. She's the first person I thought of. And I said, would you be interested in building a press on your brand of SheWrites? And I remember that she told me she had actually had several other people approach her about a similar kind of collaboration, but she wasn't as aligned with their values as she was with mine. And I think that was just because we both came out of feminist media. I was deeply entrenched in feminist publishing. And so that was it. It stemmed from me asking. So kind of similar to what you're saying, Grant, like it depends on who you know. And then if there's a shared sensibility and a shared vision, oftentimes these things spark.
Yeah, it's beautiful when they do. So now I'll ask you, how has SheWrites Press changed you over these nearly 15 years? Funny how we've got some symmetry here, about 15 years or so.
We totally do. Yeah, like very similar timelines. I mean, it's a big question because SheWrites Press is something I'm so proud of. I don't even know who I would be if it weren't for SheWrites. The press, of course, has taught me a lot about being a community leader and a lot about what it means when the buck stops at you. We have a really big group of authors now, over 1,200. And there is something really beautiful and challenging at the same time in growth. Because like in the early years of SheWrites Press, I knew every single author. There's more time in the beginning and more expansiveness when you just have a handful of authors that you're working with. And so growth, of course, means less one-on-one and fewer opportunities sometimes to connect, or you have to connect in bigger ways. You have to leverage yourself. And these days I do feel kind of like the mother hen, and yet I'll just say a quick caveat for my authors who are listening, because I'm not very maternal with them. So I guess I'm more like a combination of a big sister and a coach, or sometimes even a drill sergeant. And I do think that SheWrites Press reminds me most weeks about the power of putting stories into the world. And so in that way, I don't know if it's changed me as much as sustains me. It really does give me a front row seat into how much it matters that we do this kind of work, which is the work of providing space for writing to happen, for cultivating community, and of course, for opening doors to authors. And I believe in the power of voice. And, authors, of course, have to claim that, but you need to have support systems in place to do that as well. And so I think I'm one of those support systems. I'm a tether. I think that I tether my authors to quality and to what publishing is, and I tether them to community. And it's kind of funny, Grant, because I was very moved by a recent interview a few weeks ago with Patti Smith by Ezra Klein. And he asked her, of all of her identities, poet, performer, writer, which one was the one that she most identified with? And her response was, if you want to call me something, call me a worker. And I love Patti Smith, and I just loved that response so much. And I kind of feel like that, if you want to call me something, call me a tether, call me something useful. Like I am a worker. I am someone who connects authors to their dream of becoming an author. And, that really feels like the essence of my work. And I'm proud to do that.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Both Patti Smith's worker answer and your tether answer. You'll have to add that to your bio. Well, before we get to interview the founders of SheWrites.com, can you share one of the most inspiring moments you've experienced at SheWrites Press over 15 years?
It was so hard for me to think of a single answer, because I can't really think of one. And I also think of my authors, like in that way, I do think of them as my kids, even though I just said I'm more like a big sister, because it's really difficult to call out favorites. I try very diligently to maintain a democracy at the press to the extent that I can. Everyone is equal and all books have the same shot. And so I don't elevate any given author over the other. And so for me, it's more like a slideshow of moments that move me. It's like authors getting their boxes of ARCs and opening them on social media, being at awards dinners and watching the looks on authors' faces when they win or when they go up to give their speeches. Times when authors have come back to me years after the publication of their books and tell me at that point, like how meaningful the experience has been, or the doors that it opened, or how it changed their lives. I revel in authors' happiness, really, and their achievement and having done the thing that they set out to do. That really gives me great satisfaction. I know what people sacrifice to get to the finish line on their books. And so it's really a great feat every single time we send a book to the printer. And every single Tuesday is a publication day. So, we're celebrating authors' publication dates. And, it's hard to celebrate each and every person because we basically have like 5 or 6 birthdays every week on SheWrites, but cumulatively it's super meaningful. And, I'm proud to bring all of those books into the world.
It's amazing. That's a lot of birthdays to keep track of. A lot of children as the tetherer as well. Well, yeah, it's super fun to walk down memory lane a bit today. So thanks for that. And this is the community episode. And listeners, we want you to know why community matters. You can and should join us for JanYourStory, of course, and you can kind of feel into the power of a community writing challenge. If you've done one before, you already know how cool it is. If you've never done one before, though, just so you know, this is all about we are an inviting, non-confrontational, non-shaming, embracing, warm place for you to start. We will only shower you with compliments and encouragement. So please try it out. It's a good place to be, a nice, safe space. And even if you don't write every single day, we just want you to be there and even be thinking about your writing and have the intention of writing and maybe show up whenever you can, So just to experience what it's like to have this kind of wind at your back. It can be very galvanizing in the community sphere, especially. So after this break, we're going to talk community with Kamy and Deborah. They are such wonderful conversationalists, so wise, and they started the movement that gave us Brooke. So sit tight. We'll be right back.
Welcome back, everyone. This is such a privilege for me to be inviting on the show Kamy Wicoff and Deborah Siegel-Acevedo, who are the co-founders of SheWrites and longtime friends of mine. I am going to read their semi-long bios because I think that this is just important context for us to know who these two women are. Kamy is a writer, former publisher, and psychotherapist with a degree in social work. Kamy holds an MFA in creative nonfiction from Columbia and is the author of several books, including Wishful Thinking and I Do, But I Don't. Also, she has contributed to multiple anthologies, including most recently Feminists Reclaim Mentorship, an anthology. Love that, pertinent for today as well. Kamy is the co-founder with Deborah, who is also our guest today, of SheWrites.com, and also the co-founder with yours truly of SheWrites Press. Kamy began her career in Los Angeles as a writer-producer at Channel One News, and she currently serves as a trustee on the board of the Brooklyn Public Library. Kamy has previously been on all kinds of boards. I'm not going to list them, although they are impressive, and also she is joining us from Brooklyn. So welcome, Kamy.
Thank you.
Deborah Siegel-Acevedo, PhD, is a visiting scholar in gender and sexuality studies at Northwestern University and the author of Sisterhood Interrupted and the co-editor of the literary anthology Only Child. She is a regular on Chicago's live lit storytelling stages. Deborah's essay, My Husband, the Reluctant Barista, just appeared this past October in the Modern Love column at the New York Times, and her op-eds and essays on gender, motherhood, family, feminism, and writing have appeared all kinds of places also. You guys, these lists are impressive, but I'm just going to list Slate, New York Times, Washington Post, The Guardian, and elsewhere. She is a TEDx speaker. I will say, and I have said it many times, I would not have done my own TEDx talk without Deborah's help. And she has also been involved in so many communities and leadership initiatives. She is a self-described serial builder of initiatives, bridging education, writing, and community. And I love that. It's completely accurate. Her coaching company, Girl Meets Voice, Inc., has supported hundreds of established and emerging writers. So there's more to say. I culled those bios down. But for me, and important to today's conversation, you co-founded SheWrites.com together back in 2009. Kamy and I worked together for years on SheWrites Press. But that is the beginning of where we all converged, SheWrites. And that's how I know both of you. And I know that you're such big community advocates. Welcome, Kamy. Welcome, Deborah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're excited to have this conversation about community today. So, Kamy, I'm going to start with you. I wonder if you'll take us back to the moment that you two first imagined SheWrites.com, and what was the gap that you saw, and what was the sense of what you wanted for women writers back in that time?
So I'll try to make it a little bit brief, but there's some backstory. I had a mentor, speaking of mentors, the writer, poet, and my former professor, Diane Middlebrook, who had a vision for doing a salon. So this was actually an in-person, not online thing, and bringing women writers together of all generations, backgrounds, levels of being published, not being published. The only reason you had to have to be there was that you were a woman and you were a writer. And the vision was to bring people together to talk about both the industry and the craft. So this was something that began in London and then came back. I was living there at the time, and when I moved back to New York, started there. And I was mulling what could I do with this? It was a really incredible community, but it felt like there was something there that could go bigger and that could actually have a life beyond kind of happening like in a apartment somewhere with like people really trading insight. And it was a time, I would say, too, where publishing was changing quite a bit. So it was the beginning of writers really needing to be marketers, to have skills that went beyond their craft. And it was a bit disorienting and overwhelming for many. So that was also part of the vision, was how can we make it so that writers aren't having to build the wheel over and over by themselves in this siloed way. So I was kicking this around. I was talking to different people. I was saying, I think maybe I want to do something with this. And I just kept hearing one name over and over, and it was Debbie Siegel. So I was like, I want to do this, and it's community, and it's writer, and it's this. Oh, you should talk to Deborah Siegel. You should talk to Deborah Siegel. So we met and we talked, and it was instantly apparent that this was the right person for me to do this with. She got it immediately, and her kind of knack for naming, she can talk about that a little bit, but to give her credit for that on that very large score. And I think, Brooke, you have carried this through so beautifully into the press, but built into the DNA of this thing, like from going back to Diane and her generosity and her vision. I was so embarrassed when we met to go through our Rolodexes of writers that we knew. I had like nobody and no one with any big names. And she was like, oh, and Jermaine Greer should come, and we should have, whoever. And it was just kind of overwhelming. But she really saw that what mattered was a willingness to come together, was an abundance and generosity of spirit, and also a very high quality of information and knowledge. So being really rigorous on that score too. So caring a lot about getting it right, about a high level of, execution. And again, from the first coffee with Debbie, where we sat down to talk about this, it was clear that I had found kind of my dream collaborator. And then I'll just shout out very briefly one other person, my friend Gina Bianchini, who we're talking about. She's an old friend from Stanford and had really made her way in the tech world. And she was instrumental too in helping me think about how to put this on a platform that would enable not just a top-down kind of communication, which was very instrumental to what SheWrites was about, but a lot of parallel connections and the ability for people to have their own voice on the platform and not just be kind of talked out or told, and also to be able to share what they were up to. So that's I guess that wasn't very brief, but that's the answer.
I love it.
My question is actually for Deborah. And Deborah, I remember in the 2009s, around there, just so many Nings were popping up, these new communities kind of out of nowhere, but they were just wonderful. And they seemed to fill these very interesting gaps for people. And so I'm curious, what do you attribute SheWrites' kind of meteoric rise? Like, I remember when I found out about SheWrites, I think that's when I probably contacted Brooke for coffee because I was at NaNoWriMo at that time. But yeah, what sparked all of that?
Well, first, I love hearing that we were responsible for the matchmaking shidduch, anything, that had to do with your coming together. That's a beautiful story. It's so funny because when I think back to that time, the Ning that obviously consumed my heart, brain, and soul was ours. So I don't have a memory of like, what were the other Nings going on, Ninging up left and right, but ours, I think, spoke to others the way that it spoke to us. And the way that it spoke to us was, just to go back a little bit and to fill in what, when Kamy and I came together, because I think this is that moment in our personal lives as well as in the landscape of how publishing was changing and how we were all needing each other at that moment as writers. But I was like 2 seconds pregnant with twins when Kamy reached out to me. And I remember we sat in the second floor of Fairway over, I don't think it was coffee. I think it was hamburgers.
Yes, that's right.
And we wrote on a napkin, SheWrites, and it was a time when, for me, I was also involved with the Women's Media Center and Progressive Women's Voices. And so Kamy talks about, Diane being an influence for me, Gloria Steinem and Jane Fonda and Robin Morgan, who were just founding that network of progressive women writers, and changing the media and changing the story. That was also an influential part of it. And I remember that Gloria thought we should name it She Reads, She Writes, She Changes the World. And we're like, that's a great idea, but it's a little bit long, So
way to drop that we did actually get to talk to Gloria about this project.
We had coffee with Gloria. Yeah, that was a high point of both of our lives. I drop that in whenever I can, But I think, the idea of reading, writing, and changing the world as women was like so in the zeitgeist, still is exponentially. There's all the more need. But I think the reason it took off on Ning was because it was a way to find each other in the dark and in all our little isolation tanks, and it was like internet 3.0, where it wasn't just about blogs. I had a group blog called Girl with Pen, and that was just sort of like everybody blogging or blogging in a group. And then this felt like the next incarnation of community building, where people had agency to, like, we had the power through the platform to allow people to connect with each other. I think that was the magic. And the way that I remember Mother Writer, we had like groups. Remember Mother Writer? We had the lifeblood of SheWrites in its early days was in the groups. And people would just crawl out of their isolation caves and be like, you too, you're struggling. You're trying to write in the midst of your busy, already full, overbooked life. And how can I support you? And I'm inspired by you. And what did you publish today? And what are you working on? So it was this real hunger, I think, of a way to let people connect with each other and share expertise.
I love just remembering back to that time. And I was just a user on the platform, but it was the first place where I would write something and tons of people would comment on my posts. And I was just like, oh my gosh, what is this place? It was so exciting in the beginning and just such a place of community. And like, it was, and it was fun and supportive. I remember all of that so strongly. I wanted to ask you both about community more broadly. And maybe if you can say a word about having gone through this experience and having been writers yourself ongoingly. Deborah, I know you have something out on submission right now. Why is community so essential for writers? And Kamy, maybe you can go first, and Deborah, you can piggyback.
Well, I mean, to state the obvious, it's, you as a writer, you're looking to connect and you're hoping to be, to interact with people, like as readers on one level, and then on another level, I'm just sort of thinking about how much at that time. And Brooke, this kind of dovetails with what you've gone on to do in publishing and with the press and your vision around the press. But there was a lot of resistance. There was an idea of community as a writer that was this kind of rare air around people who had agents and had been published and had a kind of stamp of status. And there was a lot of unease, I want to say, at that time, even in 2009, around the internet, around self-publishing, which was beginning, where established writers, I'm using air quotes, which you can't see on a podcast, but, were very, I had to do a lot of heavy lifting, and Debbie too, of kind of convincing people that it wasn't threatening or degrading to your status as a writer, again, quote unquote, to open the doors to talk more broadly, to connect in a way that was, that this was actually completely in keeping with the spirit of what we do when we write, which is to tell stories, to connect, to invite in, to, have an assumption around people's shared humanity and experiences, and that this is really what it is, the act of writing and storytelling. It doesn't happen up in an ivory tower. But there was a lot of, I remember giving a talk at the Center for Fiction, and A.M. Holmes really giving me a hard time, because there was this feeling of like, oh, you're gonna kind of ruin this for everyone. You're gonna cheapen the kind of status of that term author or writer. And instead, I believe it actually does the opposite. It sort of ennobles us. It calls on our best instincts and spirit of what we do when we sit down to tell a story and to invite in. So it was like, let's switch this from an idea of scarcity and exclusion and move toward abundance and inclusion. And this is actually going to lift the boat for all of us, because we need one another. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. If it does, I don't know what you're doing. You're not, you can go get a diary, I guess. and Debbie and I both had come from, and Brooke, again, I'm going to say to you that I think you attached so quickly and instinctively and immediately to it, because it was also born out of a spirit of advocacy and of uplift. And I'm going to talk about you, and then you're going to talk about me. And we're really going to be out there in a feminist context as advocates. So in these early days, we would do these days of action. We would encourage people to buy books, buy one another's books, protest Publishers Weekly when they did their top 10 books and there were no fucking women on it. Right. So excuse my French, but it's like, so yeah, anyway, that too, because community, there's also strength in numbers. And so you can get things done in a way that's effective and also fun and energizing. It makes you feel good.
I think back to one of our tenets in our SheWrites credo, which I know we'll get to eventually, but it was friends don't let friends write alone. And I think there was something about that spoke to, the perpetual writer's complex of, I suck, I got rejected, I suck, I'm going to give up, I suck, which we know, like rinse, wash, repeat, right? No matter how published we are, no matter how much success we've had, we're only as good as our last book or article. But there's just that, that mentality that's toxic. And so friends don't let friends be in it alone became, part of our MO, I think, of encouragement, of holding each other up. And also, Kamy, as you were talking, it just made me realize, too, that, SheWrites came about at the same time that I was part of another writers community called the Invisible Institute, which still exists. And, was also at this moment forming because writers of books, nonfiction, were feeling the disintegration of journalism, and the publishing world as they knew it was changing, and all the now like best-selling, we're part of that group. And there was a spirit of generosity in pooling what we knew and pooling who we knew so that we could all benefit, and I think that SheWrites is also sparked by that impulse, this kind of psychology of abundance, that more is more, that there's no need to like hoard resources and have this economy of scarcity, which is so often in the publishing industry, in the New York scene, and I think we were trying to do something different.
So Deborah, Brooke tells me that you were the one who came up with the phrase, writers don't let writers write alone. And it's really striking to me because it's similar to what one of my volunteers at NaNoWriMo used to say. He'd say, writing is best done alone with others. So can you tell us about that and why that was such an important ethos at SheWrites?
I think what inspired that was this idea that once we opened the doors and people started showing up very quickly, there was just a sense of relief of, oh, you too, I struggle, I don't have to struggle alone, that kind of thing. I also think as a writer over the years, that phrase, as a writing coach over the years, that phrase has really been a credo personally, because I think that we're better together, that writing happens in revision, and you need trusted readers in order to write well. And I just wrote about this, actually. I did a series of posts on my Substack about, kind of anatomy of a modern love essay, what I learned about radical revision. And it was, again, like, writers don't let writers write alone. I shared that draft with so many people. I think there were like 11 drafts, and each one came back with like the gift of someone's edits, right? And then being edited is such a gift, and it makes us better. And I think that on a craft level, writers don't let writers write alone. We make our work better for being in it with each other. On a psychological, deeply psychological level, this is not a solo profession. There's the idea of the writer in the garret, but that's doesn't work for many of us. That's not the material conditions of many of our lives, especially women's. And I think finding a way to encourage and support each other as women at the time, Women Plus, was really key to our survival of our writing, of our sense of ourselves, is like, we can carve out space and do this because I got a little help from my friends.
Yeah, it's really ultimately empowering. And Kamy, I wanted to ask you a question about ethos too, because I approached you with this idea to start SheWrites Press as an extension of SheWrites, because I loved the sensibility, as you said. I mean, I immediately got it. And back then it was very grounded in feminism and this grassroots space, talking about SheWrites.com specifically. And it hasn't exactly retained that identity, and you and I are no longer part of SheWrites.com, but for a long time it sustained a vibe, that it almost felt community run. And I'm curious if that was intentional or accidental, and if you can say a word about the importance of people having ownership in communities.
Yeah, I was just thinking as Debbie was talking, it actually took me back to Diane and something she said to me when I met her. And I had just finished my MFA, but I was unpublished, didn't have an agent, just didn't feel like I could own the title kind of writer. And I said a little bit to her about what I was up to, and she held me by the shoulders and looked in my eyes, and she said, "You are a writer." And I feel like that's part of what SheWrites was about, was kind of looking at somebody. And Debbie was being shy about name dropping, but we already did Gloria. So part of what was cool when we started was like, this is a platform where it's Gretchen Rubin, it's Hope Edelman, it's Francine Perot, it's like these real established writers, and they all have a member page like you.
Right.
And you are one of us. We are people who are sitting down to do this. And there's a lot of research, and I probably all know this very well, on how difficult it can be for women to claim expertise. I mean, you can say to a woman, she's held however many political positions, and then, oh, you should run for this office. Well, I don't know, am I qualified? And then some guy says a political opinion on a plane and is like, I should run for president. So, and as now I'm more in my work as a therapist, I can see this kind of through line. And I think we all probably embrace some of these principles around, like, it was unconditional positive regard, like all the way around. Like, if you're willing to sit down and do this work, you belong here, and you're doing it just like everybody else. And that's something that can help with, the Norman Mailer, like, writer's block as a failure of the ego, like, how do you kind of summon the feeling and the belief in yourself that what you're doing and creating has value, and that you belong. So it's that powerful kind of transformative sense of belonging, and without a lot of stupid snobbish gatekeeping between you and anybody really who wanted to take part.
I love being against stupid, snobbish gatekeeping.
Down with snobbish gatekeeping.
It is interesting when they come around, though, and kind of see the beauty of it all. And but that, that comes at, an expense, I guess. And, I think back to Chris Beatty, the founder of NaNoWriMo, and in those early days, it was just him. He kind of accidentally founded the whole thing. It overwhelmed him. He was like shipping merch. His like studio apartment turned into merch fulfillment center, and he was shipping out T-shirts that were stacked under his bed and posters and mugs by hand. And it definitely all got too big for him, and he became an official 501c3 and hired somebody. But was there a moment when you realized, oh, this is bigger than us? And what was that like? And Deborah, do you want to go first on this one?
Well, I just have such a vivid memory of walking down some street in Brooklyn. I've forgotten now which it is. I'm such a Chicagoan. I'm like forgetting the names of streets. And we were watching the subscriber count grow. And we hit 1,000. Do you remember that, Kamy? And we were like, oh my God. It just kind of blew us away. And then I remember like our first anniversary, and we had cupcakes, and so many people showed up. And then we started having SheWrites meetups in a real space in like Chicago and Boston and California. It was becoming a thing pretty quickly within a year. And I remember going to places where I didn't know people, but they knew SheWrites or they knew of me. That was the first inkling. I was like, oh, we're a little bit famous. Like this thing has some legs, right? Mm-hmm. And I think its ability to go both be a platform and be hyper local was something that fed it as well. I think that we had like representatives in different states and cities, and people were forming their own meetups. So again, it was like unlocking that technology that allowed people to find each other and then see what it would become. There was a lot of creativity from the grassroots of it. But that moment of 1,000, I'll never forget that. That was such a high. And then I also remember I'm looking back at blog posts I wrote about it. And, I was like, SheWrites is hiring a COO. I remember there was a big moment when we kind of brought in a third to help, scale the model. And we were trying all sorts of things to make it viable in, certain ways. And that was exciting too. I remember when was she a COO or CEO, whatever, when our third, came on.
Girl, I want to say we did not know from a CO to a CE. I think that was it was like, when you ask this question, my mind goes to like, I remember Catherine Gordon, this amazing early
marketer, publicist.
Yeah. Amazing woman, and like integral part of our, early days. She looked at me at some point, because I was just like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like this is all growing. This is so fun. And like, let's start actually like charging people money for stuff, and we'll do webinars. And Brooke was an early, participant in that. And she was like, you should probably like get an accountant. And like, and we're going to have to file taxes. Yeah. And I was like, what? Like taxes? Like, wait a minute. Like,
you're like, this is just a salon. It's an online salon. What are we doing?
Yeah. Like everybody bring, BYO webinar. Like it's like, so the whole thing of that was actually, there were moments around that were scary. I'm going to say straight up.
Yeah.
Like, where it was just like, I don't have a background in this. Again, having to summon and kind of work against some of those ways that we're socialized, I'm going to say again, as women, to kind of be like, I have to go find someone else who knows. I have to go, I'm not going to be able to do it. And in some cases, that was the right thing. Catherine was absolutely right that we needed an accountant, a bookkeeper. But in other cases, like when we went out to start raising venture money, and putting together decks and looking at, how to model it, there was some aspects of it that we needed expertise, and some things that we could actually learn and figure out. And that even writing and publishing is not the only industry that likes to project an aura of scarcity and expertise, that no one else can do this. And I want to say that to anybody who's interested or feeling the need or whatever to start something. I mean, that's also something that you can learn. But that was bumpy, and there were some weird moments, and also times where, whatever, fights would break out, or there was a whole debate over like, can men join? And, all the usual things. And there were times where I would actually get on the phone with people because I realized that that was a better way to go to diffuse things. So that would startle people, I think, there'd be some debate. I'm going to use a nice term. And I'd just be like, I'm just going to call this woman. And I'd be like, hi, it's Kamy. Like, can we talk about this? And so, yeah, people were so invested. I mean, when you say like, how did you know? I mean, it blew up numbers wise very, very fast. Like I remember that 1,000, I think was within a week. And then it was just like this hockey stick, the thing you want to see and put in an investor deck, by the way. But it was, I mean, there's a flip side to people knowing about it and being invested in it, which is that they have their own opinion about what it should be like and how it should go. So that was also something that, we had to kind of get used to and navigate.
It's these double-edged swords. I mean, the beauty of community, and then people's investment in it is something to behold at times, and you need a community manager at least. So Debbie, I want to ask you, like, you've gone on to have lots of leadership roles in other spaces, other communities, and over the years you've been involved in the op-ed project. I love this part of your bio. You had like different versions of saying that you're a serial something. So in this case, you're a serial creator and founder, which I love. You're a mentor, a champion, a guide. I said this already in your bio, but you profoundly helped me with my TEDx talk. I really don't think that would have happened if it hadn't been for your support. So again, I know I've said it before, but thank you. I want to ask you, with all the ways that you touch writers and creatives, what does community mean to you?
That's such a profound question. I'm just trying to think about my role right now is as a director of community engagement at a nonprofit. So I'm like, I'm all about community. I feel like community is what keeps me personally sane, especially in these insane times. I think community is what allows me to go through hard things, whether it be in a writing life or in a life. And I think that community with women in particular, which has always been a through line, in all these roles, or for other underdog positioned peoples and populations, I think that there is strength in numbers. I think it really goes back to the second wave feminist principles of, the personal is political, you are not alone. And I think community is something that helps me name struggles of all sorts as not individual, but systemic, or as not personal, but collective. And therefore solutions are not for us alone, but collaborative, imperative to solve. So I think community is really my MO, I'm better with others and creating things with others. And that, that goes for whether it's my own writing or an organization that I support.
Well, Kamy, you were a writer and an author, and that was your ambition for a lot of years. And SheWrites was an extension of that identity at that time in your life. And then after you left SheWrites and SheWrites Press, you turned to psychotherapy and exited the writing world, though I know you're still involved in some ways in the literary world, especially as a board member of the Brooklyn Public Library. So I'm curious how the experience of co-founding SheWrites and all that deep work you did in community, how does that inform your current work?
Deeply. And I would say, the through line is not difficult to find. And again, sitting with 3 others here who know this, which is there's a narrative and being able to write the story of yourself, and here, again, I'll place it a little more in the context of memoir, because that's a big part of this, is healing, is powerful, is essential. So there are many ways in which we get stuck in stories about ourselves, about others, that need updating, that need to be opened up, made more complex, treated with more tenderness and compassion. I talk about this with people all the time that I work with, about thickening the narrative. Like, I'll say to people, I want you to have this mantra, like, there's more to the story, there's more to the story, there's more to the story. because often we can just get very stuck. And even the idea of belonging, which is obviously sort of foundational to community, but it's really like a recognition of the fact of our interdependence, of the fact that we are social little mammals, and we kind of exchange meaning all the time, like with others in our own heads. And being able to raise some of that process above the waterline of subconscious into consciousness, and then to develop skills in terms of how we work with it. So that, again, is a writerly sort of thing to do, because you're kind of bringing things up above that waterline, bringing them into consciousness. And then in a skillful way, you're working with them to make them make sense, and in a way actually make them more true to yourself, more true to others. And it's a very courageous, open-hearted kind of thing to do, but it's coming from a place of compassion and transformation. And that can happen with writing, that can happen in a therapy room, that can happen in a friendship, that can happen on a podcast. It's powerful stuff. So there's a reason that you see, by the way, a lot of writers move between these worlds. There are plenty of writers who become therapists and vice versa. There's a lot of fluidity there. And yeah, it's for good reason. So it feels very connected to me. And I am still writing. I'm working on something now, but I also feel like my relationship to it has kind of softened with age, and with also being in a less busy, ambitious place with it in a way that's been nice.
It is nice. Yeah, because I think it can sometimes get a little clingy for people, and then there can be all of this like negative emotion that gets associated with it for people. So
and you forget why you're doing it, right? Which is actually to understand, like to understand and to be understood.
And that takes us right back to therapy. So it's a full circle. In closing, you two, this week's episode is part of our JanYourStory prep series. And so we're doing this to get people ready and excited to write 500 words a day in January. And so if somebody was on the fence about getting involved in a writing community or joining a challenge like this, what is your sort of cheerleading mentorship final closing words about why they should consider it? You want to go first, Deborah?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. I've been reading Jami Attenberg. Is that her last 1,000 words? I love her. Never met her, but like, Jami, if you're out there, I love you. It's the kind of book, and I think that what you're offering is, the same thing in another dimension, where you can begin anywhere. And, it's kind of this idea of getting support to write through the seasons, whether it's January or the seasons of life, is really profoundly transformative if you're looking to have a practice, not just a product. I get a little twitchy with and no offense, like write your memoir in a year, write your novel in a month. Like I love NaNoWriMo, love all that impulse. But I think that, a writing practice is a lifelong engagement. And I feel like showing up with other people for the sake of accountability is huge and can help you nose it along. Not being the product, like I'm going to have a published whatever by the end of January, but just the idea of being in it, putting your hands in the mud, no mud, no lotus, that whole thing, and just getting messy and letting it be shitty writing, Anne Lamott's shitty first, all that, just like letting yourself play and free associate and have a space and a community in which to do that, I think is really essential to unlocking the sense that writers are out there and they produce books, and it's more like writers are people who show up and write.
That's our definition too. So thank you for that.
How about you, Kamy? Anything on, why should they do it?
Well, I'll say two things. One, back in the old days of SheWrites, when Debbie and I would travel and speak and go to places, people would come up to me and ask me all kinds of stuff sort of about the business, like, or they'd be like, oh, I have this title, should I copyright it, and all this, and I'd be like, how much have you like put on the page? Just ballpark, And this is, I'm saying it like, oh, duh, like go do it, but it's actually really hard and scary, and it's the thing that gets in our way so often. So to have this structure that you all are providing and a way to kind of like that incentive and a way to really actually get stuff on the page is just beyond powerful. So yes, take advantage. Like if there's a setting where that's going to be available to you, do it. And the other thing I want to say is my son is a musician. He plays jazz saxophone. And he was saying to me once why, what he thought you had to do. And he was like, you really have to get comfortable making mistakes a lot over and over, kind of in public. And you also have to have the belief, like when it's time for you to solo, that there's something that you're bringing that is yours to bring and that other people, might enjoy hearing. So I think the energy behind what you're providing with this challenge too is a way of kind of saying, you know what? Yeah, take your solo, make some mistakes, and get it down on paper. How lucky to have other people to do that with and a way to structure it.
I love that, Kamy. Your son is very wise.
He absolutely is. And you too. Oh my gosh, what a gift. Thank you for this time.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for all you guys do and have done to carry the work forward.
Thank you both. This was so wonderful to learn more. I want the conversation to just keep going. So
I know. Can we keep talking? This is fun.
Yeah, let's make it one of those 10-hour podcasts.
Well, that was a lot of fun for me, Grant. I love that we did this commemoration of having Chris Beatty on a couple of weeks ago and Kamy and Deborah on this week. It really is that stroll down memory lane that you mentioned. And between the five of us, there's been a lot of good work that has been put out into the world and a lot of writers supported and championed.
Yeah, that's so true. We've got a whole bunch of people that are just really connected to supporting others. And it's interesting to consider how important that role is, but it's the obviously less glamorous role. And, I always wanted to be a famous writer, but I actually feel pretty good, pretty great about where I've landed instead, which is to be, a somewhat unknown author, but a very enthusiastic midwife to countless writers, many of whom have become authors.
Yeah, I'm curious. Any of them famous? Because I think you had a couple big names launch because of NaNoWriMo. That's right.
Yeah, and so many at this point. I always, when I'm put on the spot, I kind of forget many of them actually. But there's Erin Morgenstern and Jasmine Guillory and Marissa Meyer and John Green and Brandon Sanderson. And there are rumors that 50 Shades of Grey was written during NaNoWriMo. I don't know if we want to claim that, but
Makes sense.
There are rumors. And then George R.R. Martin has written during NaNoWriMo. We've had celebrities like James Franco and Liz Phair participate. So yeah, so many that I now lose track of them, but it's also very fascinating for me just to kind of go through that list because all those people are so different and write such different stuff. So how about you, Brooke?
It's interesting just because, when you work in traditional publishing and then you get to, sometimes have these big authors that you acquire. But of course, when I was at Seal, we were always the underdog. And so what you would do is like get people who were starting out in their career who then would like go on to be big and then they would leave you. Yeah. That's my experience. So, but Jessica Valenti probably is the most well-known. Christina Baker Klein did an anthology for Seal and of course went on to be a giant novelist. Susan Stryker is one of the most famous trans women in the world, but not known to, people necessarily outside the LGBT community, but very, very proud to publish her. But you know what? It's interesting that these people made it doesn't mean that their work is necessarily more important. I do think that that's a critical thing to remember. I mean, some people break out and some people get certain breaks or they're particularly productive or sometimes lucky. But the number of books that I'm proud of on the SheWrites list is honestly equal, if not more, than on the Seal Press list. And I do think about that all the time.
Well, SheWrites Press is definitely a force, Brooke, and I think it's one of the few presses out there that's so community focused and so community minded, just in its orientation, and obviously it's in an origin. And your authors are so lucky to have that. I was thinking about this, and I think at every press I've ever published with, I don't think I've ever really been invited to connect with a single other, fellow author. And connecting with other writers and authors, really, it's everything. And we can give each other so much support, and it will definitely get you to the finish line. And I can say that with some degree of certainty, given all that I've experienced and witnessed, both personally and in the larger community.
Yeah, I agree, Grant. Me too. And listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to Jan Your Story Prep Month. If you haven't already, please go to the Jan Your Story tab on the memoirnation.com site. Sign up. I know that we have said it 100 times in the past couple of months, but I'm really just doing my job of being a tether, so I can't help myself. So thank you for letting me do that job. Appreciate you guys.
Well, also, I'd be remiss not to mention the cool stuff we're going to do, which includes challenges and writing streaks and rewards and merchandise and inspiring pep talks and more. All that stuff is yours to explore inside the Memoir Nation community. So we'll see you there, and we're counting down to January 1. So we'll see you next week.